Biden administration told a collective of aid workers bluntly to their face that they will continue to allow Israel to murder them because Israel is our close ally. In a very tense meeting in August, the Biden administration told a group of aid workers that they will continue to arm Israel and they reject all calls for an arms embargo. So the Biden administration will continue to arm known war criminals, which is a violation of not only international law, but United States law. Biden officials reportedly claimed that Israel is one of the allies that we can't play bad cop to. You realize that means the official position of the Biden administration is that Israel is above the law, the same way the United States feel like they are above international law. It's very important to remember that the state of Israel is just an extension of United States imperialism. Everything that Israel has done is exactly what the United States once accomplished. In fact, it was Anthony Blinken who approved of Israeli terrorist attacks on humanitarian aid trucks. The same way that Anthony Blinken covered up Israel blocking aid and using starvation as a tool of war. These are tactics that the Biden regime supports. Meanwhile, scumbag progressives are still pretending that supporting Kamala Harris is harm reduction. There is no lesser evil. They're just two wings of the genocidal war machine. At the BRICS summit, Russia makes a gigantic push towards de-dollarization. There is a gigantic global push towards de-dollarization in response to the United States' aggressive use of economic sanctions. The United States sanctions 1/4 of the world's population, so there's no wonder the global majority want to see an alternative to this system, and that is exactly what BRICS is fighting for. At the October BRICS summit, Russia unveiled a new international monetary payment system to bypass the US dollar. Shit is getting real fast. You guys realize that BRICS has a larger economy than the G7, right? So imagine a giant economic bloc and the global majority banding together with the stated goal of ending dollar dominance. It doesn't look good for the United States. Even Western puppets like Japan is panicking because they're seeing rising influence of BRICS in the region. So we are most likely to continue to see a dip in the quality of life for Americans, all because of the ruling class obsession with waging economic war. What's poppin', my friends, my family? Welcome to another week of RBN Live. We got Nick at Night today. We got Nick at Night Roundtable. And you guys know I had to call in some heavy hitters today. There's many misconceptions many people on the left, especially in the United States, have about China and Russia. And there has been a long-standing tradition of people who you can argue means well, that will believe everything that the empire says about our enemy. And that's why you see many of the professional managerial class end up supporting of NATO. Many of them advocated for voting for imperialism in the Bernie left, and they still advocate for voting for Israel. Kamala, despite her support of Israel. And there's also people who believe CIA talking points on Syria. I know that back in the TYT days, back when they were pushing the lies about the Syrian gas attacks, it was one of the things that radicalized me the most because I was a young lib, Bernie Sanders leftist. And then I kept seeing people who I found agreeable, who support Medicare for all and other things. They were get a lot of things wrong about foreign policy. Now, the easiest foreign policy issue to get right, I believe, is the one of Gaza. Even people who are relatively moderate see the genocide in Gaza going on, and they realize that is a problem. So what I've been trying to do, because I've been brainstorming the best way to attack this empire, the lights that we never seen before. My best conclusion that I came to is attacking the Zionist machine, the head of the snake of the Zionist entity. The Zionist entity plays such an important role on behalf of the empire. It's the aircraft carrier to the Middle East, especially in the light of this genocide in Gaza. I figured, and I understand I have criticisms on my left, and I understand that that's fair. I'm not immune to criticism to my left, but my rationale was we should take this moment, even as Marxists and communists, to form a coalition with people who are horrified by genocide. But if you're going to build such a broad coalition, which I'm proposing this coalition to take out the biggest threat to Americans and the world at large, Zionism, you will have people come in that tent that says stuff you disagree with. This is natural. And I had Shama Sawant on our show, and I love Shama. You guys know we got a great relationship with Shama Sawant. Great relationship with the Green Party, who've been great to the channel. But something that irritates me. You guys saw it when Shama was last on, and that's the first time you guys ever seen us disagree on the channel, where we had our little sparring about China. That's the one thing that the worker strike back Green Party left, some of them in the upper echelon leadership, they get wrong. Don't get me wrong. There are people in the Green Party, in worker strike back, they don't get China wrong. They get everything correct. It's the leadership. And it's the academics, like our friend Bush were as well. So with that said, that's my intro. I want to introduce our guests. I appreciate them for being patient. And I have been obsessed with China over the last year because just like the DPRK, like Russia and many other countries, I realized I was lied to. So I've been on this binge where I invite banger guests, our brother Q Anthony Ali, Carl Za. We had Li Jingjing on, Jason Smith, Danny Haifong, because I'm trying to learn about China. So we have Carl Za, host of the Silk and Steel podcast, and our dear friend Q Anthony Ali, amazing intellectual and educator. So you already know this is going to be a banger roundtable. I'm going to start with Carl first, and then we go to Q Anthony Ali, because it's going to be more of like a free-flowing conversation, because trust me, I will be learning a lot too, because I'm still developing my knowledge on China and decolonizing my mind on China. So Carl Za, I want to pull this up. I think I have it here, where something that shocked me to my core. It's like when you realize about the Tiananmen Square massacre, the fact that that's not real, the fact that people have been spreading these lies about the Uyghur Muslim genocide. And this is what our friend Bush said. He was critical of leftists who, quote unquote, cape for Chinese racist. So, Carl, I'm going to pass it to you very vaguely. What do you think is the biggest misconception some leftists in the West have about China, and why do they fall for Uyghur propaganda? And why is it propaganda? I'll pass it to both of you guys. Let's start with Carl first on that theme.
Well, U.S. has been waging a propaganda campaign against China since 1949, the founding of People's Republic of China, because a lot of people may not know, in the post-World War II period, original design for U.S. for East Asia was to have China as junior partner with Chiang Kai-shek as our man, our bastard in East Asia. But that plan didn't pan out because of Chinese Civil War, because the Chinese communists came to power. Ever since, United States have a hate boner for China. The population has been told lies after lies. Well, it's made easier because there's a general ignorance about China. We don't, in United States, not many people really know about China. The only information they get used to be from legacy media, from the mainstream media, and now they are getting more information from social media. But yet, the U.S. intelligence services, the feds, they are very effective at polluting the informational source. This is where we get stuff like, there's the so-called Uyghur. By the way, U.S. Congress just approved a $1.6 billion to fund anti-China propaganda. $1.6 billion. right? I mean, how much did they? What's a number that they use for disaster relief for North Carolina
Yeah.
or Florida? That again, the problem with China, the problem the U.S. elite have with China is that China exists. It exists as an independent sovereign nation that can say no to the United States. This is a fundamental problem U.S. establishment has with China because they can't make China bend to their will. Again, there's a lot of misconception about China. That, you will hear people from the left saying, "Oh, China is just as capitalist as United States." Well, okay, hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. When Obama went to Apple, went to talk to Steve Jobs and say, "Why don't we make iPhone in United States?" Steve Jobs told Obama, "No, not going to do it. Not possible. Because we just don't have skilled workers in the United States." Can you imagine if Xi Jinping had a talk with Jack Ma from Alibaba and said, you got to really source more Chinese components locally? And Jack Ma says to Xi, "No, not gonna do it. Sorry, that's not profitable." Why
do you think his ass disappeared?
Exactly. I mean, this is the difference between United States and China. United States, the money rules over everything. People like tech billionaires, they can't tell politicians what to do because they're the one who is funding those politicians. When Obama get such a feedback from a counter from Steve Jobs, there's nothing he could do. He just accepted it. Steve Jobs told him, "This is the way it's going to do. We're going to continue to build iPhone overseas because it's more profitable, and besides, there's no skilled workers in the United States." Obama just swallowed it because there's nothing else you could do. That's totally different in China because in China, the state will tell the capitalists what to do, and people, even billionaires like Jack Ma, they will have to stay in their lane. If they step outside their lane, guess what happens? And this is where we get the crazy Wall Street Journal reporting saying like China disappeared Jack Ma. Of course, they did not disappear Jack Ma. Jack Ma just decided to take a low profile, because he doesn't want to run afoul of the government.
I'll tell you exactly why Jack Ma fell off the face of the earth. It's because he made that god-awful movie where he got to go beat up on Sammo Hung, Wu Jing, Jet Li. Did you see that shit? Tony Jaa? He made a martial arts film where he got to go beat up on martial arts legend. And she saw that shit and was like, "Nah, get him out of here. Get him out of here, bro. He's doing too much."
Q, I want to get you in here as well, and I love that you took time to debunk that propaganda talking about China being capitalist, because I love when people bring that up, because I like, especially if you're on the right, when they say, "Oh, China are not really even a socialist country," I'm like, all right, let's start there then, because they seized banks and they regulated landlords. So if you guys don't think China is socialist and capitalist, let's start there then. I don't want to hear any complaints.
Well, I mean, one of the things that people love to talk about when it comes to China and their financial policy, apparently this country is supposed to have been like sliding into financial self-destruction for 4 solid years now. Remember, we kept on hearing about God, what's the name of that company, the real estate company, Evergrande. Remember that Evergrande was supposed to be taking China down like Lehman Brothers. And you know what actually happened to Evergrande? And this is, I swear to God, like if I could get healthy quicker. As a matter of fact, like, hey, if anybody in the Revolutionary Blackout Network that wants to help me like write and make videos, like please reach out, because my with my 2 busted legs, it's hard for me to sit up for lengthy periods of time. But this is stuff that I've been wanting to write about for a little while, which is that China actually proactively enacts economic policies that will catch companies off guard and deliberately destroy them because they pose a threat to China's policy future. So what Evergrande was doing was essentially giving out they were giving out properties at a low interest, doing the exact same thing that the United States was doing, which was coming in at a low interest rate, which were teaser rates, and then blowing up the interest rates on those property owners years down the road. What China did was enact a policy called the 3 red lines. And what that does is forbid a certain amount of foreign equity ownership in real estate companies. Evergrande got caught offside with that. And when they blew up, people thought that they were going to take down the Chinese real estate market with them. What actually happened was that China simply took over their contracts and ended up delivering on those contracts. So all the condos, all the homes that were supposed to get built that were under contract to Evergrande, the Chinese government ended up either bankrolling the final delivery of those housing themselves or contracted them out to other companies. And they expressly forbade other companies from bailing out Evergrande. It was essentially controlled demolition. And the thing is, the way that the China, this is one thing that I really do sort of admire about the Chinese. Like, people think that I'm a bit of a jihad, and I have my criticisms of China. I just express my criticisms of China with other people that know about Chinese policy. I don't just go on the internet and start spreading criticisms willy-nilly. Like, I'll talk to Carl, for example. Like, he and I will have interesting conversations about China, but I'm not going to have these conversations with people on Twitter because they don't know what they're talking about. Now, the interesting thing about Xinjiang, this has been in the works since the Bush years. So let's take you all the way back to around 2004, 2005. I actually started noticing this when in my final year to university, that the United States and human rights organizations began calling out China for two reasons. One, that they weren't being proactive enough in stopping religious extremism in the Central Asian region. So in Western China, which is Xinjiang, or the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, which borders Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, etc. That is where Wahhabist fundamentalists were beginning to develop a resurgence, especially towards the second half of the first Obama administration. China and the United States were working together hand in hand on anti-terror policies. But one big criticism the United States had of China, and this was actually a worthwhile criticism, was that if you don't give people jobs, if you cannot let people into the labor market, that becomes a hotbed for extremism. If people don't have if they're not able to take care of their families, if they're not able to raise their children, if they're not able to give them a better life than they had, then they begin to turn to religious extremism. And it's particularly potent in that area because that area, which is not very far away from, say, Pakistan and Afghanistan, that's where Deobandists and Wahhabists were beginning to spread their ideology out to Uyghur extremists. And so in 2007, you had knife attacks that were happening. Extremist fundamentalists would get on buses and start knifing people, or just like pulling out a knife and start knifing people indiscriminately. A couple of these attacks had happened, and then that's when you had this massive Chinese crackdown on religious extremism. And I will even say, I will even say myself that I think China went too far in some respects. But what they were dealing with was a real threat, not only of terror against Uyghur people, against Chinese citizens generally, and this was coming from the outside. But the other part was that they were facing the possibility of balkanization. So when they cracked down on religious extremism, they put people into what Radio Free Asia and China human rights defenders were calling work camps or prison camps. What it actually was vocational programs. And yeah, sure, were there buildings that had like barbed wire around them? Yes. But the people that would go into these programs would go in at like 9 o'clock in the morning, 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. They would have a lunch break where they could leave, and then they would go back for their afternoon classes, and then they would go home after that. So they were not kept in detention inside of these facilities. They weren't slave labor facilities. What they were learning how to do was to build what was going to be China's solar power future. So keep in mind, out in the XUAR, there's massive stores of silica. And silica, quartz and silica are what you need in order to build solar panels. So the Chinese solar future was essentially inside of Xinjiang. And there's two major cities in Xinjiang. There's Urumqi and Kashgar. And Kashgar is essentially not only a manufacturing hub, but it's also one of those free trade zones that China has. So the Uyghur workers were pretty fortunate in this respect because they would go to these vocational facilities, learn essentially how to assemble, program solar panels. They'd go out to Kashgar and other outlying regions as well. They would get jobs with these solar panel manufacturers and then send the money home for their families. So over the course of a single generation, you had Kashgar and Urumqi go from what were essentially hotbeds of poverty and extremism to essentially becoming an economic miracle. Now, enter Marco Rubio right around 2012, 2013. And Marco Rubio starts in on this idea that China is bulldozing mosques, that they're essentially they hadn't used the word genocide just yet, but they were saying that China was cracking down on Muslims, that they were taking away their ability to worship, that they were bulldozing mosques. They were if you had religious headwear or religious outerwear whatsoever, if you had any like religious clothing or gear or garb or whatsoever, you would be arrested, which is absolutely not true. But that began to pick up steam, and then enter another fellow named Adrian Zenz, a Christian extremist who not only 100% agreed with Marco Rubio, but was also receiving funding from the U.S. State Department and also from the Australian defense industry to go into China and report back completely falsified information as to Chinese Uyghur women, for example, being subject to the Chinese government's plan to crack down on their population growth. So they were forcibly being sterilized. And then once you look into these accusations of forced sterilization, what it turns out is that, well, the women were just going to their doctors and asking about birth control. And because they were offered the ability to have birth control, because they had the ability to do family planning, which was the first time that they'd been able to do that in their history, what Zenz did was project how many children they would have had without the ability to get access to contraceptives and say, well, because this amount of children were not born in the region, therefore it must be a genocide because of interference by the Chinese government. We would have had, 35 million children born, but because these women have access to birth control, there's only 20 million children born. Therefore, 15 million children were not born. This constitutes a genocide, and this is what they've been running with for the for the past decade. This bullshit information, and the reason that
isn't it crazy that liberals repeat that too? Because it makes sense that like the extreme right wing conservative believe that repeating. It's crazy that liberals believe it. But go ahead, Q.
They're repeating a narrative that began with Marco Rubio. They're repeating a narrative that began with a far-right Christian extremist that said that his job, his God-given duty, is to destroy the communist Chinese government. And what this essentially is that the United States never really forgave China for pulling the rug out from underneath Bill Clinton when Bill Clinton wanted to develop or further develop the special economic zones in China to the extent that they'd be able to have free trade access into China. And he was told no. The United States never forgave China for it.
And
on top of that, the Belt and Road Initiative, which you've probably heard about, and for your viewers, the Belt and Road Initiative is a massive economic project that China's taking on to have gas lines, rail lines, modes of transportation. It's basically a new Silk Road from China all throughout the currently developing global south. And this runs right through the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So they're going to have a rail line and a gas line running right through the region because Xinjiang is also a massive pocket of oil and natural gas. So what the Chinese government is attempting to do is help other countries industrialize and develop themselves. And the United States and the West broadly simply cannot handle that. So they've started this narrative that millions and millions of Uyghur people are being repressed, that they've been killed, that children aren't being born that were supposed to have been born in the first place, that babies are being pulled out of their mother's wombs, and all sorts of other horrific atrocities, which have never been proven true. That they're bulldozing mosques, and the way that they know that Chinese government is bulldozing mosques is because they take aerial images. And if a building once had a minaret, like the dome that you'd find on an old mosque, if there's a building that had a minaret on it before, and the building either no longer has a minaret or the building is no longer there, therefore the mosque was bulldozed. Meanwhile, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region has tectonic plates running right underneath it. So this area is massively vulnerable to earthquakes, and it has had earthquakes and floods. What the Chinese government does is rebuild mosques elsewhere that aren't on tectonic plates, or if they do get rebuilt in the same region, that they're earthquake proof, that they actually have safeguards against earthquakes, rather than an earthquake hits the region and then a mosque or other buildings collapse, and then you have massive amounts of casualties, or a flood happens and pushes. Literally, these floods have happened where a flood hits a floodplain where there happen to be cemeteries, and then bodies are pushed out of their graves, like caskets are being pushed out of their graves. So what the Chinese government does is redevelop the region to earthquake-proof the buildings and to build cemeteries, places of worship, and so forth that are protected against the natural elements. But if you listen to, for example, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, what they're saying is that the Chinese government is simply wiping away Uyghur culture, Uyghur institutions, Uyghur buildings, etc.
Wow, Carl, I know you want to chime in. Anything you want to add? Great breakdown, King. Great breakdown.
Okay, I will bring some historical trivia here. Do you guys know where is the first? Okay, I'll just tell you guys. The first CIA officer ever killed in the field, in the line of duty. Guess where he was killed? In China. Guess what his final mission was? He was posted to Xinjiang, and he was sent there right after the Japanese surrender in 1945 to this is when the Chinese Civil War break out between the communists and the nationalists. And one of his job is also from Xinjiang, it borders the Soviet Union. So from Xinjiang, he set up a listening station to gather information about Soviet nuclear tests in the neighboring Kazakhstan. And when the communists were closing in, his other task is to liaison with a local Kazakh herdsman, to incite them to fight the communists. And when that failed, he had to flee with the Kazakh rebels. They tried to go through Tibet, but they didn't bother to inform the Tibetan local authority, the Dalai Lama's government, and so the Tibetan border guard stopped them and shoot them. And this is how the first ever CIA officer ever killed in the line of duty died. It was on his final mission to carry out the spy mission in Xinjiang. So U.S. has an interest in this region for a very, very long time. In fact, in the 1980s, so after Nixon, also, CIA people also know they founded the Tibetan rebels during the Tibetan rebellion. And my parents, both my mom and my dad, when they graduated college, it just so happened in Cultural Revolution time. So they were sent down. They're part of so-called the sent down youth. So we're sent down to the Tibetan region in China, and because my mom was a nurse and my dad was an engineer, and my mom remembers right like in the early 70s, right after Nixon visited China. This is because CIA cut funding to the Tibetan rebels. My mom remember in 1972, the last Tibetan rebels coming down from the mountains to reconciliate with the Chinese government. And this was a result of CIA cutting funding to the Tibetan rebels. And in the 1980s, so this was a China-US honeymoon period. Both sides were aligned against the Soviet Union after Sino-Soviet split. CIA actually had a listening station in Xinjiang. CIA operated a listening station in Xinjiang throughout 1980s. So U.S. is very much involved in that region. And one of the thing that got kind of one of the problem that started out the radicalism in Xinjiang was filtered through Afghanistan, because in 1970s, in 1979, after Afghan war got started, U.S. was flooding weapons to jihadis to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union. But 1979 was also happened to be the year the Friendship Highway, or the Karakoram Highway, was finished, that connected Xinjiang to Pakistan. So a lot of goods were traveling from China to Pakistan, but along with goods, other things were traveling too. For example, at that time, CIA were trying to provide ground transportation for the rebel, for the Mujahideens. And first, they had this harebrained idea of using Tennessee mule. This has got to be some pork barrel scheme from U.S. senator. They were trying to provide Tennessee mules to carry weapons for Mujahideens, but the Tennessee mules couldn't hack the Afghan climate, and they died in mass. So the CIA went to Xinjiang and they bought hundreds of thousands of donkeys and mules and used them to send them through Pakistan to Afghanistan to supply the Mujahideens. But what happened is, with all the flow of goods, people also travel. This is time when China finally opened up to the outside world. So some young Uyghur men also went to Pakistan, where they study, work, but some of them ended up in the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, where this is where there's a lot of Saudi-funded madrasas were proliferating to brainwash the children of Afghan refugees. And some of these young Uyghur men ended up there, where they got indoctrinated, and then they ended up going to Afghanistan to fight the so-called jihad against the Soviets. And in the 1990s, Soviet withdrew in 1989, and then it's a free fall between different Pakistan warlords in Afghanistan. So by 1992, some of these Uyghur jihadists start to come back into Xinjiang, and this is when the earliest terrorist incident in Xinjiang was reported in 1990, and some of these returnees are creating trouble. And there has been a series of incidents of bombings and assassination in Xinjiang all throughout 90s, all throughout 2000 and 2010s. We just don't know about it because we don't know anything outside of China. People don't know anything that was happening in that region. And then as Q Anthony has pointed out, then China started to address the root issue. One of the problems was during the open and reform period of China, there was a transition from a socialist planning economy to a market economy. And during the market economy, some people were left behind, especially in remote regions in Xinjiang. Back in the 70s, early 80s, everyone had state jobs. It doesn't matter whether you're Uyghur, you're Han, you're Kazakh. Everybody gets state jobs. You get a cradle to grave a job, ironclad job security. So everybody was paid the same, even if the salary was very low, but it's equal. But with market, when the market forces were introduced, you're gonna have the inequity start to emerge, right? Some people get richer, some people became poor, and in a very remote area in Xinjiang, and that became more some problem became more acute. One of the thing is Xinjiang is an Uyghur autonomous region. What that means is in the autonomous regions, people are entitled to be educated in their own local language. So if you are Uyghur in Xinjiang, you can choose whether to be educated in standard Mandarin, which is a national language in China, or to be educated in the native language, whether it be Uyghur, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Tajik, whatever. And you can go through kindergarten to college, all be educated in Uyghur language. That was fine during the socialist plus state plan economy. But during the market economy, the people that speak standard Mandarin obviously had a huge leg up than the people who only speak Uyghur. At this time, a lot of people don't even speak standard Mandarin in Xinjiang because they don't have to. But because in China, the economic development in China started in the East Coast. That's where all the factories start producing, toys, shoes for export, and all the goods were manufactured in the East Coast. And to be able to hitch yourself into that part of the dynamic economy, you got to know the language. You got to be able to speak standard Mandarin. A lot of people even in the 1980s, Xinjiang, outside the big cities, outside the Urumqi, people in the rural area especially, they didn't even speak standard Mandarin. And that's another thing. At the time, Xinjiang was primarily an agricultural economy. 80% of the people were engaged in subsistence agriculture. And for people who don't know, Xinjiang, the area of Xinjiang is huge. It's the size of Alaska. But there's actually very little parts of Xinjiang is habitable, because most of Xinjiang is either the giant Tian Shan mountain range or the Taklamakan Desert, which is the world's second largest moving sand desert after Sahara Desert. And so people live in these oasis towns that was fed by glacial runoffs in the middle of the desert. So there's not that much arable land. But from 1949, from the founding of the People's Republic of China to 1980, 1990s, there has been a population growth. Like the Uyghur population increased from 3 million in 1949. Yeah, it quadrupled. It more than quadrupled. Yeah, it more than quadrupled. But all these people were still primarily engaged in subsistence agriculture on very limited piece of arable land that's surrounded by desert. So this has created a lot of underemployment among the youth. And many of these youth weren't able to speak the standard Mandarin, which allowed them to gain jobs elsewhere in mainland China. So this is what the created kind of the general environment that made the jihadis who came back from Afghanistan, they have a way to propagate their extremist Wahhabist faith. And this is the problem that Chinese government was trying to address. So they thought, okay, well, from the Marxist point of view, everything is economic. We got to address the material condition. So they tried different things. They first tried to invite industries from the coast to open up shops in Xinjiang, right? To build infrastructure in Xinjiang. But then very soon they realized they still have a problem, because these companies that come in to build roads, to build buildings, they would still have a preference to hire those people who can speak standard Mandarin, right? And so you still have majority of people getting left behind. So then they started the government program to organize Uyghur youth from Xinjiang to go work in the factories along the coast. And in return, the Chinese government will give tax incentives to these factories who hire Uyghurs. This would be the basis, what later they termed the Uyghur slave labor, by the way, because they said this is state organized, so there must be coercion involved,
there's forced migration, forced transportation of people from one place to another, and that's part of where they began to lay the genocide narrative, was that people were being forcibly transported from one area to, or one region to another. And what's really happening, and the thing is, if you're a Canadian, you should be able to completely understand this. So I'll put it this way: when in the early 2000s through about the 2010s, up until the big fire at Fort McMurray, you had thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Canadians from all over the place, from Ontario, from Quebec, from Newfoundland, from PEI. They were coming from all over Canada, and they were migrating to Calgary, Fort McMurray, etc. Why? Because they were moving there for the oil industry. You could either try to struggle it out as a, I don't know, like a graduate of the arts in Ontario, with the high real estate prices, with the crappy job market. You could try and eke out a living in Toronto, or you could just move to Alberta, where your best friend had gone there a year and a half before and now owns a pickup truck, owns a nice house with a 2-car garage, is getting paid enough money that he can put savings aside. He's settled down, he's met somebody, he's raising a family, and everyone else is like, holy shit, why can't I have that? So then everybody starts migrating to Alberta. We had the exact same thing happen here. So anybody who saw the massive migration of workers from all over Canada to Alberta, particularly in Fort McMurray and Calgary, you should be able to understand why it is that Uyghur workers were moving to industrial centers. Why? Because that's where the money was. That's where the work was. They were trained to work in these factories. The factories were making a killing because the solar industry was taking off at the time. So who wouldn't want to go out and work there? That's the part that really irks me, is people act as if anybody that doesn't look like them and anybody who doesn't speak their language has no agency at all and is simply at the mercy and effect of their government.
And that's exactly right. But there's are differences, cultural differences and religious differences between the Uyghur community and the Han majority, obviously. So if without government regulation, the private company, for sure, they would prefer to bring Han laborers into Xinjiang, even because, one, they don't have to provide halal meal, because most Uyghurs are Muslims. They have a dietary requirement, whereas if they bring Han migrant from Sichuan or Henan or elsewhere, they already speak the language. There's no language barrier. They don't have to provide
cultural differences.
Special. They don't have to provide halal meal.
Halal is not even that hard to provide for. Holy
No
smokes.
pork.
You just have to, well, yeah, no pork, and you just have to say Bismillah before you slaughter the animal. Like, it's not that hard.
But the companies, they always go the easiest route. They always so
low friction, yeah.
If you leave it to the private companies, they would always prefer to hire Han workers. So this is why the Chinese government is organizing workers to go to the coastal area to work, and also because the language and barrier and cultural differences. So Chinese government will incentivize the factory who hire Uyghur with tax breaks, tax incentives, but then this is when Radio Free Asia start to spread rumors. They start reporting there's a lot of resistance in the more conservative rural religious area because the parents think their daughters is going to go to the big coastal cities and become whores, and like they are going to abandon their religion and then going to start drinking and partying and hang out with Han Chinese boys or whatever. So they start to spread that rumor in Xinjiang to create trouble for this government program. And then in 2009, this was the time of the great financial crisis. A lot of the factories were shut down. That the factory were built for export for United States were shut down because the economy was drying up in U.S. because of subprime crisis and all that. And then this is when tension started because you have a lot of Han Chinese workers in Guangdong. They're getting laid off because the factories are closing down, and they see the government still ship all these Uyghurs into the factories where because the government is giving tax incentive to these factories to have them continue to hire Uyghur workers. So there was a rumor that started in 2009. It was I saw this online happen in real time, by the way, because I spent a lot of time on the Chinese internet, and someone reported a Han Chinese girl went to the dormitory because in China in the factories workers live in the dorms. The factory will construct a dormitory where all the workers together. But because of Uyghurs, they have special cultural, linguistic, and dietary differences. They usually have their own separate dormitory, area. So the rumor started was this Han Chinese girl went inside by accident, wandering into the Uyghur man's dormitory, and she was raped. But the government is trying to hush up. Government is trying to block out the news. They're trying to keep this to avoid any criticism of the government policy. So this rumor spread like wildfire, and there was thousands of men gathered outside the Uyghur dormitory in I think this was Dongguan in Guangdong, and that started a massive brawl between the Han Chinese workers and the Uyghur workers. Couple Uyghur men were killed in this mob violence, and then this news then fed back to Xinjiang via at that time a lot of the U.S. social media is not blocking China. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook was all available in China. So a lot of the Uyghur diaspora group funded by NED, a National Endowment for Democracy, they start to spread rumors in Xinjiang about, there's all these your sons and daughters you sent to factories working in the East Coast. They're being mass lynched. Young Uyghur women were raped in their factory dorms, and so this created a huge anger. There was a huge protest in the capital of Xinjiang, Urumqi, on July 5th, 2009, and that protest soon spiraled out of control. The people couldn't storm into the government building, so the crowd dispersed into the surrounding areas. And this was a time when was during the evening rush hour. A lot of the buses, a lot of the people getting off their work, office workers getting off their work, they're taking the buses home, and a lot of this bus route goes through like the Uyghur neighborhood of Urumqi, and people were being pulling out of the buses and attack and kill. This was the July 5th Urumqi riot. It was over 2,000 people were injured and 200 people killed. And so this was what was started the Chinese government crackdown, security crackdown in Xinjiang, when they realized, okay, we have a big problem. We actually do have a big problem in Xinjiang. And this is when they intensified, both the organizing people to work in the factories, but also they started the what they call vocational training, but it's also part de-radicalization center. Of course, there's involuntary features. Obviously people had to go when they're being told by the police they had to go. So but the idea was always to eventually integrate these people back into the society. The idea is de-radicalization. So they steer away from extremist ideology, but at the same time, while they're there, they learn a marketable skill, whether whatever that once they are out of the program, once they're out of the de-radicalization program, they can become a productive member of the society. That was what the program was designed for. I mean, are there some cases where Chinese government went overboard? Maybe that's possible. Are there instant abuse? That's also possible.
Yeah, I think for example, like one piece of criticism that I think sticks is having Chinese officials literally go into people's homes and stay there, right? I could see how that's I mean, that's fundamentally a violation, but again, like you're dealing with a situation where you have to choose between either cracking down on that extremism, and you're talking about the 2009 riots, right?
Yeah, 2009.
Right, and that was the type of unrest that hadn't been seen since the revolution. So you're choosing between that or trying to establish some sort of order. So on the one hand, like, no, I'm not going to say that was a really dumb idea as far as I'm concerned. But but now that doesn't happen anymore. Like the officials are no longer staying with the families forcefully. People don't feel that they're under surveillance all the time. And I think it was Danny Haifeng went there. Didn't he go there this past year?
Yeah.
Just to check it out and talk to people. Yeah. Just check it out, see what's happening, talk to people. And this has been happening since about 2022, where an Associated Press reporter went there. And you know what he reported back? I forget the name of the reporter, but an Associated Press reporter goes there and travels all around, like not just Urumqi, but around the surrounding region. I think he went to Kashgar also, and reported back that people were drinking in the streets. That it's terrible. This is actually in a way worse than before because you have Muslims who were drinking.
I never heard of that before.
I will say that's a worse state of affairs. I can say that because I'm Muslim. It's like, wait a second, you all are doing what now? Haram. Right? But any secular American shouldn't really give a shit.
Exactly. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, and by the way, the re-education program, de-radicalization, vocational center, whatever you call it, that all ended in 2019. Chinese government announced in June 2019 all the centers were closing down. All the returnees have now been released and returned home. But the Western media, of course, didn't believe it. And they're still pushing the propaganda through ASPI, this Australian think tank that was founded by Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, U.S. State Department, etc. They're still pushing this narrative of Uyghur genocide or million Uyghur in the camps, and then 2022 finally, when I think it was AP or Washington Post reporter that went to Xinjiang, they actually confirmed, yes, all the sites, in fact, are closed. All those previously reported so-called what they call concentration camps, or they have been closed. All the ones that have been identified by satellites or whatever, all these sites has been closed, and things are returning to normal. But yeah, of course, they're upset that not all the women are covered up, and then men are drinking, so that's also bad. But now they're saying, but the problem is with the propaganda. The way that it works in the West is at first it plants a seed in your mind, and later when the debunking comes out, it doesn't matter anymore because that meme already stuck in your head, and you just keep on believing as if it still exists. One example I give is the so-called red chip. They came out with a report about China is planting this malicious chip on the motherboard that allowed them to to find out what porn you watch or something, and then later they the people who were involved, Amazon, Apple, and they all came out and say, oh no, there's no such thing, this is not true, we did not find any such thing that you reported. But the debunking barely made a ripple. People keep on thinking
they run with the lie, but the lie outpaces the truth by leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
The same thing with the Chinese social criticism. People nowadays still believe there's a Chinese social criticism, even though there was a 2019 article from, I think it was Foreign Affairs or Foreign Policy magazine. The title is the social, which is not a pro-communist, pro-China publication by any means, by the way, which said the Chinese social criticism is a myth, right? But people.
They refuse to drop in. That's why I'm glad I'm doing
the UK. The United States, Canada, the UK all have social credit systems. It's called your credit score.
Bro, I sold cars, and that's the biggest ripoff of all time. Literally, poor people paid more money for their cars than people with money. Explain how that makes sense. And there's still a lot I want to break down. Let me know how you guys doing on time. I know I'm personally greatly enjoying this lecture. Carl, I'll pass to you. Anything else you want to add before I continue? Go ahead.
I want to just add to one last moment. There's a purpose they're pushing this Uyghur genocide narrative, not only to blacken China, not only to smear China. It was also it gives reason for the U.S. provide cover for U.S. sanctions against China. This is Uyghur genocide came out. The narrative came out around the same time the U.S. started to apply sanctions on China. Of course, now they move. They already moved to other reasons like national security or whatever.
Right. But I mean, one thing that you really should. One thing. Sorry to interrupt you, but I want to make sure that we don't miss this point. One of the biggest reasons that the United States is levying these sanctions against China is because they are deliberately trying to exclude Uyghur workers from the labor supply. So when you look at what these sanctions are saying and what products it's on products. It's mostly on electronic products, but specifically semiconductors and solar panels. Why? Because the United States cannot compete in these areas. So it's a 2-for-1 deal. If you sanction semiconductors and solar panels, not only do you allow Americans to compete, but you're also putting Uyghur workers out of work. They're sanctioning any products. It's not a matter of Uyghur workers are being exploited. Well, how do you know that? By what metric are you saying that Uyghur workers are being exploited? I've talked to people that have interviewed Uyghur workers. They work 8, 9, 10 hours a day sometimes, but they do get overtime pay. So they're not being told within these sanctions. The United States government is not being reported to that X, Y, and Z labor violations are happening. It's just that an Uyghur worker at some point along the supply chain has touched this product, and the answer is nope. It's going to be sanctioned. It's on the sanction list. And once you do that, what they're hoping to do is pressure companies into not hiring Uyghur workers to put them back into the situation that they were in back in 2007, 8, 9, when they had the Urumqi riots. They want to recreate those conditions.
Wow. And another reason they're pushing this Uyghur genocide narrative, this is very important. It's to distract from the Israeli atrocity in Palestine. I'm glad you brought that up. Do this all the time. Like, remember, I remember there was a time, I think it was back in 2018 even, when Israel was bombing Gaza back then. They started push suddenly all the mainstream media is talking about Xinjiang as an open air prison.
Yep.
Everyone know Gaza is an open air
prison.
Yeah, they literally started stealing the language. You guys know I watch too much corporate media, and I noticed this as well. They steal the language that we use in order to describe their propaganda psyop attempts.
Yep, this was during the yeah. I remember this. I do remember this, Carl. It was during the Gaza border protest, which ended up turning into a firefight. This is where Israeli snipers were just killing school children, like targeting young girls and shooting them in the head. And what did you see on the news? It wasn't that. It wasn't any sort of connecting the Gaza border protests to Operation Protective Edge, which was another genocidal campaign by Israel against the people of Gaza. What you were hearing about was that the Uyghur people are living inside of an open air prison, that they're being kidnapped, they're being disappearing inside of these facilities, that people are trying to cross the border, being captured by Chinese authorities and never being heard from again. I mean, and the worst part about that, if you looked into any of the stories from the people, because it was always either people that were associated with the East Turkestan independence movement, or people that had, or people that were in ETIN, or were associated with the World Uyghur Congress. They were the ones that always set up these interviews. And I remember there was a lady. Her name was Tursunay Ziyawudin. I hope I got the name correct. You remember her? The one that was saying that the Chinese government took her passport. Somehow she got across the border to Kazakhstan, but then she showed CNN the passport that was supposedly taken by Chinese authorities. So it's like, lady, hold on. If your passport was stolen by Chinese authorities, how do you have a passport to provide to CNN?
Yeah, and it shows a date. It shows a date when the visa was issued, when the passport was issued. It was like at the time, like. So you're telling me the Chinese government prosecuted you, genociding you. Then they give you a passport. They issue you a passport right after that, so you can go across the border to Kazakhstan and talk to the human rights reporters. Are you kidding? Like, I mean,
yeah.
It's an insult to our intelligence. And before I let you guys continue, because I'm greatly enjoying this lecture, this learning session. I hope you guys, and I hope. Let me just say that I hope you guys are learning a lot. I'm learning a lot. I sincerely hope the Green Party is learning a lot. I sincerely hope that Butch Ware is learning a lot, because what you do when you are in community with each other, if you supposedly are in community with each other, and I spoke out and I don't support cancel culture. You educate, you try to inform, you try to essentially make our brothers and sisters in the community better. The exact opposite, and I'll pass right to you, but the exact opposite of blocking people who are trying to give you this information. And this is the problem. Like, everyone had bad taste. I had bad taste before. Like, I've been roasted for takes I had before. The problem is, like, when I seen the blocking of people sharing these receipts to Butch Ware, and this is what we take offense of. And I'm gonna open back up to the doctors on the panel today. The offense that we have, Butch and the Green Party, is comparing, after witnessing you guys destroy this narrative for an hour, me just chilling, learning, comparing what's happening with the Uyghur genocide in China to what's happening in the Congo, sir.
Yeah.
Comparing that to what's happening in Palestine, it's disgusting, man. And once again, I just want you guys to get better, because I want to see the Anti-Genocide Coalition succeed. I really do. But if we're going to be in community with each other, we have to correct people when they're wrong and when they honestly is acting very uncouth. And like anyway, go ahead, Q. I'll pass it to you. I know you got thoughts.
No. There was one thing that somebody had mentioned a second ago, that Tursunay Ziyawudin, and this is, she's not the only one who said this. Other World Uyghur Congress stooges have said the same thing, that the Chinese government forced her to eat pork. Now, I wish people would actually learn a little bit about Islam before like spreading these fabrications. But if there's no other food available to eat, so if you are deprived of food and pork is the only food that is made available to you, pork becomes halal. Did you know that? But like, the reason that these lies spread so fast is because people simply don't know enough about the region. They don't know enough about the religion, and there's also the language barrier that stands in for it. But I wish people would actually take a little bit of time to understand the cultures, to talk to the people. And I get that if you live in North America, like it's not likely that you're going to run into somebody from the Uyghur community who is not an ETIM supporter. However, you have to understand where they're coming from as well. And unfortunately, the same is true, for example, of the Tibetan community. We have a fairly large Tibetan community in Toronto, but the unfortunate part is that when you talk to somebody from the Tibetan community, you have to take their stories with a bit of a grain of salt because there's an incentive for them to lie to you. Now, with the World Uyghur Congress, go and look up the founders of the World Uyghur Congress in Canada. I forget the name of the Uyghur Association, but we have another Uyghur Congress in Canada as well. The problem is the founders of these organizations. Okay, Carl, do you remember? Because you were talking about post World War II, right? Okay, you're nodding your head enthusiastically because you know where I'm going with this. Okay, so you know how you're talking about post World War II, and do you remember how there was supposed to be a meeting between the Uyghur councils in the region? They're supposed to go to Beijing to negotiate joining the Chinese mainland, and then the plane ends up going down, and they're not able to speak for themselves. They've died, obviously. And then the remaining council members were the ones that ended up negotiating their entry into China proper. Now, some of those who passed away in that wreck were part of a fascist coalition, and some of those remaining were part of a fascist coalition as well. The ones remaining ended up having to flee Xinjiang and flee China altogether. Some of them ended up in the United States. Some of them ended up in Taiwan. And the reason that they left is because they were militantly fascist people. They not only did not believe in any sort of like admixture, any sort of cooperation, any kind of community with Han Chinese. They didn't believe in that kind of cooperation or unity with anybody. They were virulently racist, fascist people, and their own sons were the founders of the World Uyghur Council. So if you look into the background of if you look into the background of the World Uyghur Congress, it's an explicitly fascist organization that advocates for armed terror and takeover of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So when you listen to these stories about these Uyghur refugees, these escapees, etc., that have these horrible, heart-wrenching stories, you also have to understand the organization that wrangles those interviews is an explicitly fascist organization.
This is, I mean, people in Canada would understand this if you make an analogy to the Ukrainian diaspora, after World War II. I mean, this is the same. This is the same. All these like fascist element, they escaped to paradise in Canada and U.S. and this happened with the Cuban exile as well. The Vietnamese diaspora that escaped after 1975 liberation of Saigon, and I would like to point out the founder and executive director of the Campaign for Uyghur is one named Rusan Abbas. And Rusan Abbas admitted on air she worked for the Pentagon as an interpreter at Guantanamo Bay to integrate.
I remember that. Yeah.
to interrogate the Uyghur prisoners that held out Guantanamo Bay. Okay. She is just a state employee. She's literally
sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
She's literally a U.S. government contractor, right? And she is the one that's funded the Campaign for Uyghur, who's pushing all these propaganda porns on the internet. And a lot of the time you look at these propaganda porns, like one of the famous example, you see this video of a police beating this poor man. And the thing is, you easily fool Americans and the people who don't speak Indonesian, because it was an Indonesian video like from years ago, like a thief was caught and the Indonesian police was beating him, and he became viral in Indonesia. So they just put a Chinese flag on that video and said, this is the Han Chinese police persecuting a helpless Uyghur man, Because the most people who bought into this narrative, they don't even know what Uyghur look like or what language So if they see this Nation video, they're like, "Oh my God, this Chinese committing horrible atrocity again." And another example is when they use that BDSM porn from Taiwan of a man who was getting all wrapped up and turned around, and then say that was some kind of Chinese torture, Chinese police special. I mean, again,
no, it was Taiwanese degeneracy.
Yeah, I want to stress all these propaganda, right? Especially at this juncture, is to serve to distract from the real genocide and real atrocity in Palestine. And this right now, at this point, we should all focus on the spotlight on Palestine. And this is if you go talk about this fiction Uyghur genocide, you are serving the agenda of the U.S. State Department. You're serving the agenda of Mossad, of Netanyahu. This is why people get upset at Butch Wires, because he's really distracting from the real problem by kind of lumping together like the totally fiction Uyghur genocide together with the very real Palestinian genocide. This is why before I said even Uyghur genocide is like essentially Holocaust denial when people compare that to the Holocaust, because you are denigrating the very real atrocity that did happen and is happening.
That's happening right before our eyes. Yeah, and just to bolster the point that I was making before, that the sons and daughters and relatives of these Uyghur organizations have very real ties to fascism in China post World War II. One of the founders of the World Uyghur Congress, his name is Erkin Alptekin. Look into his father, Isa Alptekin, and tell me what you find. All right, this is the guy that I was telling you, Carl, the one that ended up fleeing. So Isa Alptekin was one of the people that was left behind after the tragic accident that claimed the lives of several council members in the XUAR. And rather than stay to try and negotiate whether the Xinjiang region was going to become part of China or not, he ended up fleeing the region with millions of with bars and bars of gold, with millions of dollars worth of gold bullion, fled to Taiwan on a CIA jet, and then from there went to the United States. And his son was the founder of the World Uyghur Congress, stationed guess where? Guess where the World Uyghur Congress is, their headquarters is.
I would say either Germany, either Turkey, Germany, or US. There's only three candidates.
Munich, Germany.
Munich, yeah, Germany.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, you cannot take any of these people at face value whatsoever. I know that I think Butch Ware means well. I don't mean to say that he's a bad person or that he's a CIA stooge or something like that. I think he genuinely means well, but he's one of those people that falls victim to this idea that you're supposed to listen to people's lived experiences. That lived experiences carry just as much weight, if not more sometimes, than in factual matters, material realities, etc. But when you listen to somebody's quote-unquote lived experiences, you're just hearing them tell you what their story is. And I'm just not that interested in people's stories. If the story bolsters what we already know to be true, if the story counteracts something that we know is not true, and they can bring hard evidence to it, then I'm very happy to listen. But lived experiences on their own are not positive or negative. They're simply stories. And unfortunately, he's the kind of person I think he's very well educated, far more educated than me, very well traveled, but a little bit too gullible and a little bit too credulous.
Why so many people in elite academia? And I want your guys' thoughts on this. Because Butch Ware, he's an academic.
Well,
why do so many people in elite academia?
It's called postmodernism. That's what they do in academia. Unfortunately, academia has been completely overtaken, especially in the liberal arts. It's been completely overtaken by this postmodern idea that power is not a function of value or form. Power is a function of relationships. It's a function of relations. So if, for example, Carl living in Indonesia has more power than me, a black man living in the imperial core, I don't know what Carl's reality is. I have no idea what his income level is. I don't know where he lives or whatever. But I can just say, Carl being an Asian man carries more power than me. What the fuck does that mean? You know, so when you sit down and then you listen to these Uyghur expats and listen to their sob stories, and you think, well, who would ever tell a story that was a lie? Why would anybody ever try to manipulate me? Well, that's exactly why. Unfortunately, it's like listening to like a Miami Cuban about their stories under Fidel Castro, and longing for the days of the Batista regime, back when Cuba was essentially like a gambling den and a whorehouse. Listening to them long for those days and saying, yeah, we should bring Cuba back to that. Thank you for your lived experience. Like, I'm sorry, at some point you just have to be able to call bullshit, and the way that you are able to do that confidently is by educating yourself about the region and about these stories before you let somebody open their mouth and give you a bunch of BS.
Yeah, who you listen to, right? Should you listen to the Iranian diaspora, pining for the return of the Shah, or should you listen to the should you listen to the veterans of the South Vietnamese army about the good days when they were hunting commies in the jungle of Mekong? I mean, like who do you listen to? But the most important thing that people gotta keep in mind is this is distraction. It's distraction from the real resistance that's going on today. And if you push the Uyghur fake Uyghur genocide agenda, guess who you are standing next to? You are standing with Tony Blinken. You are standing. You're
standing with Marco Rubio, who began this whole thing.
Yes. I mean, this
you're
is
letting Marco Rubio. Yeah.
Carl Zah, Marco Rubio. Q Anthony Ali, Lindsey Graham. What side are you on? Green Party. Yeah. What side are you on? Are you on the side of Carl Zah, or do you agree with Mitch McConnell? Like, come on, guys, it's not hard to get this stuff right. And
I'll tell you. No, here's the thing. Can we be honest?
Go ahead, Q.
Can we be honest about why this is happening? Unfortunately, Americans have a very hard time coping with the fact that China is fucking lapping them. They're getting the tables ran on them. Unfortunately, China is the world's future, or at least they seem to have a solid grasp on what the future of the world is going to look like. One where global South countries are able to rapidly industrialize themselves. One in which they have industrialized themselves to the point where people still act like China is a manufacturing economy that has workers working in rags and that they operate sweatshops from border to border. China is right now, it has already moved into post-industrialization. China right now is in the process of urbanization, and they're doing an incredible job at planned urbanization, a much better job than most of the countries that we live in have ever been able to do. People talk about, for example, like the Chinese ghost towns. What are these ghost towns? They're cities that were planned in advance. The government says we are going to need to be able to fit all of the people that live in this country somewhere. Where are they going to go? How about we build and modernize, have apartment buildings, condos, train services, restaurants, gas stations, pretty much everything that is people need already in existence before they even get there, rather than our current model that we have in North America, which is letting our governments be led by the nose by real estate developers. Unfortunately, China is incredibly good at their managed, planned economy. We haven't been able to catch up. They are far ahead of us in terms of technological progress. They're outpacing us by leaps and bounds. And I think that there's a bit of a racist element to it where we look at them and say, how fucking dare they? How dare these yellow people run the tables on us? Exactly. Who do you think you are? And that's why it's so easy to believe these narratives. Yeah.
And Q, I want to ask something real quick if you don't mind, because you mentioned how many people in the West are terrified of China's rise. And I want to give you guys thoughts on this because it's something I've been thinking about as well. Those are the neocon liberal types who hate China for geopolitical purposes. But when you look at Bush Ware, and even my friend, and once again, just like I like Butch, I like Shama. They've been good to RB, and I think they're good faith people. Last time I had Shama on, I agree with Shama 99% on everything, and we always have a great time. The first time we ever had disagreement, it was on China. And I want to get your guys' thoughts on this because this is what I was thinking. I think a lot of people in the West, they can't rationalize how evil our government is. So they see how corrupt the United States is. They see how evil the United States is. And in order to cope with that fact, they tell themselves that other governments are as corrupt
as bad
as the
United
States. They're like, oh, no, you think America's the only corrupt country? Motherfucker, it's about time for us to say There's no other corruption like Western American corruption. There's nothing like Zionism. There's nothing like the American neoliberal capitalist structure. And in order to cope with living in the evil empire, they tell themselves like, oh man, Russia has to be bad too, right? China has to be bad too. Other countries that provide healthcare to their own people, like Russia, for example, like countries like China with an average rent at $500 compared to ours, they gotta rationalize in their mind. Look, I'll pass the panel, Carl, Q. What are you guys' thoughts? And we can wrap up here soon. I don't know how you guys doing on time.
You guys hit the nail right on, man. Like a lot of this copium they're producing. The more China rises, or more copium it's going to produce in U.S. and the West. And the copium is to continually tell people, "Oh, you think it's bad over here."
These are the dangerous emissions we have to worry about.
You think it's bad here in U.S. No, China is worse. You know, China is doing much worse than us. So you don't have to worry about it. You know, you don't have to. You can't just tune out because everywhere is bad. But this is another opportunity here I want to address. Like China is just another capitalist, imperialist country, whatever. High-speed rails. High-speed rail. If you look at the Western publications, they're all constantly throwing shade on China, say, "Oh, the high-speed rail is not profitable." You know, this is because, you know, they're not building this for profit. They're not building high-speed rail for profit. You know, only like a hyper-capitalist society in United States must center everything on profit rather than centering on people. You know, in China, they build a high-speed rail so people can go have great public infrastructure. And in doing so, they're actually creating an add-on economic effect by promoting tourism, by promoting economic growth that's connecting different cities together. But these things are hard to understand for the Wall Street types because they only see the short term, you know, the quarterly earning reports, right? That's the only thing they understand, the stock price. That's why, you know, this is why it's ridiculous to
the United States and Western countries, they live essentially from financial quarter to financial quarter, whereas China is planning out in terms of years, if not decades. So and with the United States, you're planning your government, your infrastructure, your municipal treatment, anything that has to do with government provided services or government backed products, industries, etc. Those are being planned out from election cycle to election cycle, which in the U.S. is basically on an annual basis. Whereas with China, I mean, granted, like they have their own elections, but their plans aren't in terms of quarters or election cycles. Their plans are over the course of decades, which again, which is why the Belt and Road Initiative, as wildly successful as it's been so far, and as far as it has to go, these are things that you look 5 years, 10 years out, and you're going to wonder to yourself, how the hell did we let ourselves get rooked like this? How is it that we're not involved? Well, right now, the only way that the United States and Western countries know how to participate in, say, the Belt and Road Initiative or the rapid industrialization of the global South, in partial thanks to finance capital provided by the Chinese government, also being provided by the Russians and Indians, etc. But that's another kettle of fish. The only way that they know how to participate in it is to try and disrupt it, to try and tell its own people that there's a cost to all this, that there is a new imperialism happening, and it's coming from the Far East. This untrustworthy yellow horde is flooding into Africa, to South America, to the Caribbean, etc., and they're making these countries their own, or to essentially try to back terror groups and drop them in Chinese laps, drop them in Russian laps. That's the only way they know how to participate.
Yeah, well said.
Go ahead, that's exactly right, because you know, like people now have some ridiculous notion as in like, oh, China trade with Africa, that means China is neo-imperialist. Like what? Like I literally post a video of a Chinese factory in Madagascar where they hire local workers to make fake nails. And the workers were celebrating because they just made their monthly quota in advance. So that means they will get bonuses. And people look at that video. I saw some comments. There's like, I'm sorry, I'm pro-China, but this is imperialism. I'm like, what do you mean? This is imperialism. I mean, this is literally just trade.
That just dumbed down what imperialism actually is, just like comparing the genocide in Gaza to Uyghur. That's why I hate when people say that, because what you're actually doing, you're dumbing down what imperialism actually is. But continue, Carl.
No. I mean, that's exactly right. What they're really doing is like saying what you said before. Oh, China is just as bad as United States. So like China, there's no alternative model to United States to this world to lead this world, because everyone is bad. You might as well be complacent, be happy with what you got, the U.S. led hegemony.
Yeah. And I want to pass to you guys for last thoughts. I'm gonna say that this was a very informative show. Hope you guys learned a lot. Western elite academia doesn't have shit on this. You know what I mean? This is the education that we in the working class, we as anti-imperialists, must be obsessed about, must continue to spread in our communities, because we can't allow counter-revolutionary CIA propaganda spreading in our coalition. So that's why equipping ourselves with this knowledge is the best we can do. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this lecture, this education segment. So Carl, pass to you. Any last thoughts? Just quickly wrapping up. We can begin to wrap up. We got to do this again. Very enjoyable stream. Any final thoughts, Carl? Anything you want to add? Q, as we wrap up?
Yeah, I think I said all I needed to say, and I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting Q. He always add great commentaries.
Yeah, always great having you guys on. Great to have you on, Q. Anything you want to plug? Any last thoughts that you have?
No, I mean, there's just my newsletter that I started, but then I had my major injury and my knee surgery, so I'm getting back into it this week, which is the culture.org. I guess the last thing that I have to say is if you see me posting from Beijing sometime in the next couple of years, don't say shit. Don't say nothing. I don't want to hear it from you.
Yeah, we've been thinking about having a Substack on RBN, dude, and we need Shani have you write on there, because that's something that will be powerful. That's something that we've been thinking about. But anyway,
oh no, yeah, hey man, I'm happy to work with you guys whenever. Given that I basically I'm consigned to like my bed and my desk over the next several months, yeah, I'm happy to write and work with you.
I used to write before I did YouTube stream. I started on Substack. I had a few articles that were that was that we've been thinking about restarting Substack for a long time, but it's been something that we keep pushing back. But I got to hit you up, because I feel like we can write and educate so much on, especially the China issue. So there's so much information that.
Here's the thing, like I love history, right? I'm a big fan of history. You know that my specialty is the history of slavery, particularly in West Africa, the Caribbean, and North America. But one of my big loves, like Chinese and Korean history, are just so fascinating and interesting to me. So and Carl, same goes for you. Anytime that you want to have a chat about that, I'm happy to come on whenever.
Subscribe to my podcast, because that's my specialty. I'm actually doing a chronological retelling of the Chinese history from the very beginning, eventually to the present. Right now, I'm around 509 BC. When Confucius was 40 years old, and so I'm subscribe to my podcast on Patreon. Just search for Silk and Steel Podcast. That's my podcast, or check out my YouTube channel. I do have a YouTube channel, just Carl Za, and I'm also a prolific shit poster on Twitter. If that's
you got to bring me on. You got to bring me on so I can talk shit about An Lushan and his.
Oh shit! Okay, for sure, for sure.
And Lushan and his bullshit rebellion, and also my only beef with the Mongols. What was their problem with Muslims? See, if the Mongols had simply embraced Islam earlier, they wouldn't have had many problems.
But they did eventually. I mean, you gotta
towards the very end.
Yeah, you gotta give it some time for massacre and all that, and then they will come around to it.
Yeah. Make sure you guys check out Carl's show. And I definitely gotta take you up on that, Q, because once again, I love history. That's how I got started before politics. So thank you guys once again for watching the show. Make sure you guys check out Q and Carl. We have a banger tomorrow, bro. We got a post-duopoly show returning for our pre-election breakdown. Man, it's gonna be a shit show no matter what. So that's gonna be fun tomorrow. Wednesday, we also, let me pull up my guest for Wednesday. We got banger after banger this week. Manila Chan is joining us. She's based. First time she joined RBN. So Tuesday, Wednesday, we got another fantastic week for you guys. Hope you guys enjoy the stream. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Peace out, my friends. Take care.